A common problem with the early Honda Pilots was that the bulbs lighting up the buttons in the console would burn out. So here you see mine, and you see these bulbs here, and then these over here have all burned out because the buttons are very dim. So here I'm just going to walk through removing the trim and getting that HVAC control out of there so I can get to the bulbs. So the first thing is to remove these side trim pieces, and they should come out from the top. You can see me struggling a little bit, but there actually is a bit of a grip on the sides where you can kind of work a tool in to pull forward towards you, and then they'll pop out from the top and then peel out from the bottom. This next trim piece is sort of a U-shaped, and it just comes out with these 4 screws. And then 4 more screws to remove this joined unit. It's both the CD player and the HVAC unit together. And then there's just 1 screw on either side of the HVAC unit to pull that out, and then there are the connectors on the back. Okay, with the head unit removed, I brought it over to the bench and then flipped it over, and there are 4 screws on the back side, and then the back is also held on by some tabs. So you have to sort of pull those up and then hold it in place while you pull the other, the remaining tabs. And then the back comes off and exposes the PCB, and then you just flip that over, and that exposes the PCB that holds the bulbs. So here's the first bulb I'll remove. It just takes about an 1/8 turn counterclockwise to pull it out. You'll see I do it here with pliers, but you can actually do it with a screwdriver. And there's the bulb. It's a little incandescent bulb stuck inside a plastic fitting, and the leads of the bulb go down through it and then pop out the bottom. You can just barely see them there. So here's a packet of bulbs that I bought on Amazon. They look like they're going to fit properly, and I'm not exactly sure if they match the current rating, but we'll just try them out and see how they go. So then the trick is going to be to pull out those leads. And with a good pick tool like this, it really wasn't very difficult. You just kind of pick out a little bit and pull them and straighten them out, and then start to tug on the bulb, and everything will just slide right out pretty quickly. Okay, now it's time to insert the new bulb. I left this at normal speed just so you can really see how it goes in. It's not really difficult. You just have to have the leads follow the grooves that are already in the fitting. And of course, you got to get them inserted into the 2 holes that are provided, separate the leads correctly so they slide in. But after that, the leads slide through, and then you just, again, bend the leads to follow the grooves in the fitting. And I'll leave some links in the description for any of the components I used, including these bulbs. And then there's some other stuff I'll do later on with the navigation unit, and I'll try and leave some links for that, for those components as well. So I'll just show one more bulb replacement here. I ended up replacing all 4 of the bottom bulbs. I didn't replace any of the top ones. They were all lit. They're a little bit larger. I did take one of them out here, you'll see in a minute, just to measure it, make sure I knew what size it was for the future. Okay, here I'm just going to remove one of these larger bulbs and measure it just so I have a reference in the future. And this one mics out to about 1/1600ths of an inch wide. So anyway, that's what I'll order if I need one in the future. After that, it's just time to seal up this box with the 4 screws in the corners and put it back and give it a test. Okay, just plugging the unit back in. I see all the buttons are now lit, so that's working. So now I'm going to move on to the navigation unit. And that starts off by removing this little button and pulling on this trim piece. It just requires a little prying, and it just pops out. It's got clips. And then that exposes 4 screws that hold in the navigation head unit. And by the way, I used a magnetized screwdriver just because I didn't want to drop one of those screws down into the dash. I don't know how far it'd go, but it would be a real pain to try and get it out. Okay, with the navigation head unit removed, brought it into the bench, and the casing comes off with 5 screws, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and 1 in the back. And these are just small black Phillips head screws. And with those screws removed, then I can start to pry the trim piece off. There's a little joystick thing on the front, and that had a little knob that just slides off. I didn't show that. Then the PCB is held down by 6 screws, 3 on each side here. You'll see me pull out. There's actually 2 PCBs back to back, and they're joined with a ribbon cable. And I'll show in a second how you can remove the ribbon cable. Okay, so now you see the second PCB and the ribbon cable, and this PCB just fits into the trim with some clips, so it just takes some prying to get that out. And it's easier to work on this PCB without this ribbon cable attached. So you just pull down on this gray bar here with some fingernail action there, and the ribbon cable just slides right out, and then the PCB is free. So these are the bulbs. Unfortunately, these are actually soldered in, so they're a little bit more work. You have to desolder them and pull them out to replace them. One thing I noticed I didn't show here is these bulbs were covered with a little green rubber cap, I think just to sort of dim the bulbs. I removed that before I desoldered them. So initially I just used the same bulbs that I'd used in the other unit here, and that did not work. These seem to be 6 or 6.5 volt bulbs, and I didn't have any of those. So what I decided to try and do is use an LED, which should last longer anyway. But since the LED wants to operate at about 3 volts, I used a 3.3 volt zener diode to make up the difference. So here's a little photo of how I implemented that with the LED and the zener, and here's a little schematic to show how it's wired up. And of course, soldering this is pretty simple. I just wanted to solder it very close to the body of the LED and then clip that off. And then I just applied 6 volts to it, and you can see here it's drawing only about 3 milliamps, so should last a good long time. And I just solder the 2 long leads in place here. Just note that you have to pay attention to the polarity, unlike the incandescent, which really doesn't care which way is ground and which way is VCC, but the LED and zener combination does care. And then just to point out an oddity in the PCB, these 2 pads have positive on the right side, and all the other pads have positive on the left side. Okay, after I got all those LEDs and zeners soldered in, it's just a matter of reassembling everything. One other note is I did put it back together again and found that the LEDs were a little too bright. So I fished out those little rubber caps, the green caps that had been on the incandescent bulbs, and I just put those on top of the LEDs, and it seemed to dim it just about the right amount. Okay, and then in the reassembly, the PCBs get fastened back in with these 6 screws, and then the body of the unit goes on. It's a little fussy, but once that's on, then this is just 5 screws, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and 1 in the back. And then of course everything's got to go back in the car. The connectors go in pretty easily. The navigation unit just uses those 4 bolts to get screwed in, and then the trim around it just needs to be pressed in. And then the HVAC head unit just has those 2 screws that hold it to the bracket. And then once that is in place, then that whole unit screws into the dash with 4 bolts. And once that's in, then this trim piece goes on with 4 tapping screws. And then last are just these two trim pieces that fit in from the bottom first and then press in at the top. So here's a final image showing all the buttons now that they're lit. And the balance isn't perfect, but I'm not really sure if it was perfect before anyway. And I really did this mostly for safety. So I'm going to call this a success.